All right, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Basra Daf Kufnan Beis, a nice quick blot. More housekeeping, Baruch Hashem. We have a family wedding this week in New York, in Mirz Hashem. So Wednesday, Thursday, Shabbos is going to be Ruvain Handler, and I'll be back for next week. And then December 8th to 17th, I'm in Israel. So Ruvain's going to be covering that also, Baruch Hashem. And at some point, I'll come back to the reservation. January 1st, when I have nothing else to do with my free time. Wow. Okay. Says the Gemara on the top of Kufnan Beis, Mid Beis, still trying to pick apart the Matnas Shchiv Meira iterations, all the various cases that we've seen already, plus many others, where we will see different halachos just the tiniest changes. So here's a tiny change. Maybe it's not so tiny. Itmar, top of Kufnan Beis Mid Aleph. Matnas Shchiv Meira shekasu ba kinyan. When there's a Matnas Shchiv Meira where there was an added level of kinyan. Really, the Matnas Shchiv Meira doesn't require a kinyan at all. Either takonas chachamim or a din d'oraisa. We saw that many blot ago. But what's with the added kinyan here, and what impact does that kinyan have? So it's very confusing. And even in the two answers we're going to see, they weren't clear either. Says the Gemara, Be'Rav mishmei de Rav Amri. Rav was of the opinion, Arkeve atrei richshe. You're like riding two horses. We don't know what that means. Lamaisa, we'll see it in the Gemara in a moment. And Shmuel Amar lo yadana mai adunba. This is a very rare type of answer where he's like, we don't have enough information. Sometimes the questioner doesn't ask all the right things. We're missing something, as we'll soon see. So let's pick apart each of these shitas, the sheet of Rav and the sheet of Shmuel. Bei Rav mishmei de Rav Amri arkebe atrei richshe. Rav says that in a case where we have both the Matnas Shchiv Meira on the one side and the kinyan on the other, so there he says it's like riding two horses, namely that there's multiple facets of reality in regards to this kinyan. Part of it is harehi kematnas bari and harehi kematnas Shchiv Meira. There are therefore aspects of this Matnas Shchiv Meira, which has a kinyan in it, that are similar to the bari. Obviously, the kinyan aspects are going to be similar to the bari. And there's also aspects that are matnas shchiv meira, and still a level deeper. Harei kematnas bari, in that she'im amad eno chozer. What did we do? We had a matnas shchiv meira coupled with a kinyan. So says Rav, really, we're living in two worlds now. Tzvei dinim. Mitzad echad, we have the kinyan. And therefore, because it was a matnas shchiv meira with a kinyan, if the shchiv meira is amad, if it gets better, we're not chozer. We're not chozer because there was a kinyan. So that's mitzad echad. Mitzad sheni, 7 lines down. Harei kemat nashchim meira, in that sheim amar halva asa leploni, halva asa leploni. That if he were to say that this loan goes to somebody else, then that would be binding. So Rav takes the duplicative aspects of the comment, namely partly matnas shchiv meira and partly kinyan, and he says, okay, there's two things happening here. It's one kinyan, really, but there's two realities to the kinyan. Shmuel, on the other hand, has a totally different feel. Shmuel Amar lo yadana mai adun ba. I have no idea what to tell you in a case where there's a matnas shchiv meira coupled with a kinyan, because shema lo gamar lehaknoso ela b'shtar. Perhaps because this shchiv meira was referencing a kinyan, perhaps what he was actually saying was something that isn't possible. Perhaps he was saying that the only way I want this shchiv meira, this matnas shchiv meira, to be nikne is bishtar, and if that's what he meant, then ve'ein shtar la'achar misa. Now he's dead, and there's nothing binding at all. So what's underlying the opinion of Shmuel is we don't know what the intentions were of the shchiv meira. He did something that sounded like two opposing things. The matnas shchiv meira mitzad echad is binding without anything else. But once you add in a kinyan component, now we're just confused. So we kind of have this. This is a slightly bad comparison, but it's like in the realms of Palgin on Dibura, we have, you said two opposite things. Here too says, well, you said two opposite things, and therefore this is the chiddush of Shmuel. Yeah.
The shchiv meira gave a matnas shchiv meira and
was done. That was done with an unnecessary kinyan. So the Rishonim deal with, because the language that's written here is that it was kasuv ba kinyan. Right. That's the top line of the page. So it's actually not kasuv ba necessarily. A kinyan was made. A kinyan should be made. Kinyan should be made. Yeah, that's what was implied. Right. If you look at the Rashbam here, a third of the way down, shekasuv b'kinyan, v'hadinim ein kasuv kinyan b'soch hashtar, or afilu ein kan hashtar klal, el shchimera shehizkir tzava shchimera, kshechol hakol nechasav, v'gam hikne osam b'kinyan sudar. He actually, it's active. He did a kinyan sudar, lemekabel matana.
So he actually did the kinyan.
Yeah, he did a kinyan sudar. So he kinyan sudar is what you see at weddings, where the Mitzadar Kedushin says to the chassan, when you pick up this pen that I own, you're automatically going to be bound by what is stated in the ksuba. So it's an external kinyan to the item that you're trying to be kona. So this was the confusion, and Shmuel says your matnas chimera in such a case is nachal, nothing to talk about. All of that is version 1 of the story. Now the problem is that this machlokes Rav and Shmuel seems to be reversed in another Marimakom, where Rav is the one who says nothing doing, and Shmuel is the one who says, like Rav, they flip-flop. So therefore, the Gemara says a third of the way down, V'rami de Rabba de Rabba de Shmuel de Shmuel. To Shalach Ravin Mishmei de Rabbi Abo, Ravin sent in the name of Rabbi Abo, Havu Yodeh, you should know. Shalach Rabbi Lazar leGola Mishum Rabbeinu. Rabbi Lazar sent a letter to the Gola in the name of Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu in other places is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Here, Rabbeinu is Rav. What did Rav say? Let's remember, Rav above says that your arkiv atrei richbe, that there's just a dual reality because you did a matna shchiv meira coupled with a kinyan. Shchiv meira sha'amar kisvu utnu mana leploni. This is the similar idea. Kisvu is one, that's kinyan. Utnu is another because he doesn't have to say kisvu. So umeis, and then what does Rav say? Ein kosvin v'nosnin shemalo gomer laknos el b'shtar bein the shtar ein shtar la'achar misa. Exactly what Shmuel said on the top of the page. So we already see the stira in Rav. And Rama reviewed them. Shmuel hilchasa kosvin v'nosnin like Rav said above. So they flip flop their shita. Kasha the Rav kasha the Shmuel the Shmuel. Says Gemara, this is not a stira. The Rav lo kasha hada kanumine hada lo kanumine. According to Rav, his two shitas are dependent on whether or not a kinyan was actually already made. If the kinyan was already made, then kosvin v'nosnin. And if not, then we're not sure what actually he intended, and therefore he's not. So no stira for Rav. And the Shmuel, 6-7 lines from the bottom, lo kasha. Over here, where he is going to say kosvin v'nosnin, that is a case where we are saying be'yape es kocho, where the only purpose of the shtar or of the kinyan is to be mechazek the matnas shchiv meira component. It's just to be miyapes kocha. We'll discuss what this means on the top of the amud, but that is what he says is going on over here. That's why Shmuel can be mekel over here. But on the top of the page where Shmuel was machmir and he said lo yadana my adun ba, there that was not a case of miyapes kocha. How do we know the difference between miyapes kocha and not miyapes kocha? So that we'll see as an answer on the top of the page. Good. So we have two versions of Rav and Shmuel in regards to whether or not a matna shchiv meira coupled with the kinyan is considered to be problematic or not. Shitas lekan, and Rav and Shmuel answer up for themselves. Next, 6 lines from the bottom on Kufnun Beis Amud Aleph. Yosef Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Achore de Rava. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. We got to follow the names. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting in row 2. He was sitting behind Rava, who was sitting in row 1. Yosef Rava kamed de Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was giving the shiur. So if you can imagine, you got Rav Nachman in the front, Rava is giving the shiur, Rava sitting in front of them, and of him, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, not Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman the Amora, where the Rebbe of Rava was 3rd century Amora. Rava and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak were peers. So Rava was row 1, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was row 2. And Kabay Mine, the question came out. Mi Amar Shmuel. Did Shmuel actually say, I can show you that Shmuel doesn't hold of that initial sheet of Shmuel that we presented at the top of the page. How do we know this? Because a Shchiv Meira who writes all of his nechasav to another. Listen to this. Afal pi shekanu miyado. Even when there is a kinyan, that was our case. It's matna Shchiv Meira coupled with a kinyan. Amad bechozer, that if he gets better, the money goes back, the matna Shchiv Meira goes back. Turning to the top of Kufnun Beis Mud Beis, Biyadua shelo haya kinyan ela machmas hamisa, because it's clear that in that particular case that it was just machmas hamisa. What would happen if he wasn't Amad? So then it would be binding. Also, that's a stira to Shmuel version number 1, because over here we're seeing that Shmuel seems to say that only if you're Amad is it chozer, but if you're not Amad, if the matna Shchiv Meira is actually playing out because the Shchimera died. It's taka binding. So that means that the Mana Shchimera is valid. But Shmuel on the top of Kufnan Beis, Amud Aleph, said on the second or third line of the page, Lo Yadana, my Adunba. So how can you say in the beginning of Kufnan Beis Amud Aleph, how can Shmuel say Lo Yadana my Adunba? I don't know what to do when there's both a Mana Shchimera coupled with a Kinyan. And then on the very top of Kufnan Beis Amud Beis, he says, no problem at all. No, you're Kone, you're Kone. Stira and Shmuel, says the Gemara. This was the question that Rava asked to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman, who's giving a shiur, says, Achvi le biyadev ishtik. Rava asked the question, and Rav Nachman made a hand motion, a gesture of sorts, and then Rava was calmed. He no longer was asking his questions, which means that hand motion indicated something. When I was in Eretz Yisrael, I went to go watch. It was a kavod gadol. I sat in the little mobile home where Rabbi Yashiv Zichron Livracha, Zichron Tzaddik Livracha, would give shiur from, and he was giving a sugya on kral, on the halachos of eating an udder. And the Gemara says in Chulin, I think it's in Chulin, you have to, if you want to eat an udder, it's filled with milk and it's basar, so you gotta figure it out. It's mamash basar b'chalav. If you cook that piece of meat and there's milk in it, it's an isser doraisa, a triple isser doraisa. There's a lot of isurim there. So, anyways, the Gemara says you have to cut the udder shesi v'ari. You have to cut it in two axes, the X and Y axis, and then press it against the wall to get all the liquid. Someone asked a question to Rabbi Yashiv, and Rabbi Yashiv goes, he just is, he brushed it off like it was nothing, I knew what that meant sitting in the room. That meant your question was not a good question. I understood klur. What?
Not worthy of the room.
Not worthy. Not worthy. So again, I don't know exactly what the hand motion was, but the achvi le biyadeh. Rav Nachman said to Rava, whatever he said. Now Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who was sitting in the second row behind Rava, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak was a Talmud. Rav Nachman was a Rav. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he says, Kikam, when they got up from the shiur, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Rava, my achvilach. What did his hand motions mean? I didn't follow. I wasn't holding. Amar le, the miyapa es kocho. So now I'm gonna explain it out for you. We know the sheet of Shmuel was soser itself on the previous page. We saw that there is a difference between Shmuel. When Shmuel, in case number 1, says, Lo yadana my adun ba, that's when the guy really did a kinyan. He did something real. He's matna shchiv meira, take my stuff, and here's a kinyan suda. In that case, Shmuel was hard-pressed to say that the kinyan was chal, because my adun ba, I don't know what to do. But in certain cases, the kinyan's only coming along to strengthen the matna shchiv meira. So where the second piece is coming and only b'miyap es kocho, so then don't worry about it. Don't worry. Of course, Shmuel is going to be fine. So the motion that Rava saw from Rav Nachman was, don't worry about it. It's just, and he knew Rava knew it's Talmud Chacham. He said, Rebbe means that it was just miyap es kocho, and that's why in such a case it worked out. So we said that the difference between the two versions of Shmuel was this concept of miyap es kocho. How do we know when the kinyan is just a chizuk, a miyapa es kocho, a raya to the matna shchimera? And how do we know that no, really the kinyan is part and parcel of the deal? And then Shmuel will say, Lo yadana me adun ba. So it's like the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizda, because when it's miyapa kocho, the shtar says something in it. What does it say? The kanina mine mosif al matne sada. And it's nikne, and I'm just adding on to this. No big deal. That's when it's miyapa kocho. So when we have that line, it's miyapa kocho. And then even if we couple the matna shchimera with a kinyan, Shmuel will say kosvin v'nosnin, no problem. But where the shtar doesn't say the kanini mene mosif al matna sada, so then that's not miyapa kocho. That's the case where Shmuel would say lo yadana my adun ba. So says the Gemara, let's continue analyzing. We're going to stop at the very last word on the page, a little bit mitzugya. You taught me this term. This is, what'd you call it? Meir Shapiro Daf.
Exactly. It's not a Mishnah, but it wasn't Itmar. So
yeah, Itmar it's Amoraim.
Yesterday when we stopped.
Oh, really? Yeah? I wasn't here. I didn't know until this morning where you stopped. So says the Gemara, let's figure out a little bit more. Pshita, 6 lines down on Kufnan Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Kasav lazeh, v'chasav lazeh. First, the matna shchimera was to person X, to Ruvain. And then he gave it to Shimon. So Hainu dechi asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi showed up, Amar daitiki mevatelas daitiki, that when you have the feelings of the Shchib Meira showing, so then the new feelings uproot the feelings of the prior. So the second document uproots the first. What if it was Kosav Vizichaba? He writes it and he was Mizake. This was some type of Kenyan. Or, and then that was to Ruvain, and then to Shmuel, and then to Shimon Kosav Vizichaba. Here, look at this. Rav Amar Rishon Kana, Ushmuel Amar Sheni Kana. Rav says that the first person gets the Kenyan because there was a Ksiva and a Zechia. And Shmuel says the second person gets it. Let's look at this. Rav Amar Rishon Kana Harehi Kematnas Bari. This is the same thing that Rav said on the top of Kufnan Beis Amud Aleph when we presented this case 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, where we said that when you couple a Matnas Shchiv Meira with a Kenyan, Rav says that there are aspects of that Kenyan that are like a Matnas Bari. Ushmuel Amar no Sheni Kana. The second guy gets it. Why? Because Harei Kematnas Shchiv Meira. It's just a matnas chimera. It's just a regular matnas chimera. Wait 1 second. This sounds quite similar to what we saw a little bit earlier. It's not identical, but it's similar. Skip the next 6 words. Says the Gemara, tzricha. We're skipping the next 6 words, not because I want to skip them. And the truth is, when I learned the shiur this morning when I was preparing, other people do include it. But if you look in the footnotes here, it says Leisa bekisvei yad. That this is actually pashut missing from the Gemara. It was added in by mistake. It seems by mistake. And the Rashbam was the late Rishon. So he lived in the 1200s, the Chora, the late 1100s, 1200s, because he was a grandson of Rashi. So that means that at that time this line was not in the Gemara. So between then and now, over the last 800 years, we've had a lot of challenges in printing presses until we got a proper printing press. This is why some people don't like Oz V'Hadar, because they came along and they took the Vilna Shas that was put together hundreds of years ago, and they're like, oh, I'm going to put in an extra word here. So it's a little bit not so pashut. But anyways, these words, Zechora, were not around earlier. And says the Gemara, why did we need both machlokos, Rav and Shmuel? So says the Gemara, the itmar beha, if we would have only had this opinion, like where we started today, where we only had the machlokas over there, because there was a Kenyan sudar. Aval beha, where it was some type of zechia, which is a little bit different. So it says the Rashbam, what's the zechia we're talking about, right? Because if we don't know what the zechia is, it's not helpful. So it says the Rashbam, 8 lines before the wide line, Zibra Masel, Kasav Zichabal, Kasav Kon Chasav the Ruvain, Umasar Lo Ashtar Lirias Zechuso. Not a Kenyan. Wasn't a Kenyan. Just to show him what he was going to get. So Aval Beha, where there's no proper Kenyan back in the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, the low kanamine, Ema Modu Leila Shmuel. Perhaps Rav and Shmuel would agree in this case. And then, of course, V'itmar Beha, Beha Kamar Shmuel, Aval Behach, Ema Modu Leila Rav Tzricha. And in this case, the case was different. Basically, case number 1 had a Kenyan Sudar or some type of Kenyan. Case number 2 is me just showing you the start. Those are not the same things. So says the Gemara, we need to have our machlokos repeated, Rav and Shmuel, in the case of Kufnan Beis Amud Aleph at the top, where we coupled the Matnas Chimera with a Kenyan. And over here, where we have the Matnas Chimera with a showing of the star, not exactly the same thing. The Surah Masnu Halchi, that's how we learned this sugya in Surah. But Pumpadisa, Masnu Halchi, and Pumpadisa was taught a little bit differently. How is it taught over there? Just a few lines left. Amar of Yirmiyah bar Abba. Sholchu lemi be Rav l'Shmuel. Says the Gemara, it was sent from the yeshiva of Rav to Shmuel. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu, teach me Torah. Shchiv meira shekasav kol nechasa la'acherim v'kanam yado. If you have a shchiv meira who wrote over all of his nechasim to other people, and there was a Kenyan, mahu, and we're going to stop in the middle here, shalach lahu, ein achar Kenyan klum. What does that even mean? Ein achar Kenyan klum is a very cryptic language. After the Kenyan, there is nothing. Okay, that's the baseline. And tomorrow we're going to start at the top of Kufnan Gimel Amud Aleph and try and pick that apart. And that is a relatively short blot, just like today's was. And Amir Hashem will pick up from right there. Wishing you all a beautiful night.